Hi, we're here.
Hello.
I am so excited to open this episode of Platformers. My name is May Baseron, and today we have here Jennifer Riggins. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.
Um,
Hey,
and
Meg.
we're going to talk about metrics for your platform. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am not a platformer. I interview platformers. I've had hundreds of conversations at this point in the last 3 years since platform engineering became a household, not a household term in tech, which we are very keyword friendly. So, or, jargon friendly. And so, yeah, I'm a technology journalist and I cover the developer experience and the cultural aspect and impact of the tools on that developer experience. So, in the last 3 years, it's gone from DevOps as the keyword, maybe API management before that, agile before that, and now the new one is platform engineering and developer productivity, which makes sense because it's a combination of, in response to this huge tool sprawl we've had over the last 10 years, where we've given this autonomy to developers to just decide what they want. There's also developers who are very expensive to employ, and companies are now maybe didn't realize their duty to employ people. And if they employ
Right.
people, they're overhired. And
Yeah.
so we're looking for ways to make these expensive developers more productive and to measure it. And sadly, sometimes to find places to cut, which does seem arbitrary as well, but is true. So, and then we have the next level of this huge influx of experience influencing the developer experience, which is generative AI, which is maybe still not affecting besides customer support most of our day-to-day, but for developers it is absolutely a front of mind and front of GitHub.
I mean, I have a bunch of questions, but do you think it will get to the point where it will affect customers? Like, will customers see the change, or if the developers' productivity isn't, or if the developers are not happy? Do you think it will get to the point where it affects customers?
Okay, so it already does. We know happy developers are more productive, happy workers are more productive. That's time and again scientifically proven. So it would. I think what's interesting, I believe Patrick Dubois, the coiner of the DevOps term, has spoken about this idea that we may get subscription fatigue. We already have subscription fatigue, but we may have feature fatigue. So as fast as we are producing, if we break into these smaller teams with smaller pieces of content, eventually people are going to be fatigued and not want to change things all the time. I think even we get frustrated. I assume that's why LinkedIn has basically not updated anything for the user perspective in an egregiously long time, including being acquired by Microsoft, which one would assume has an influx of much money. But with that in mind, it hasn't changed that much. And we hear our parents getting so upset if something changes on Facebook or things like that. So
Right.
I think we
I mean, oh, sorry, you were saying.
just have to understand if it's worth it going that fast. And if maybe we reach a peak level of productivity. That was a wonderful question that someone brought up in this year and said that, I'm just looking it up right now, so I can give them their credit where it's due. But Hearn, I will search their whole background later, give you their thing. But what would the world look like if we hit maximum developer productivity based on the things we currently measure? Is that world actually desirable? And that's Winston Hearn, who's the senior technical product manager at Honeycomb. But I think we're far off from that. But I think that is for the hyper detailed developer productivity engineering organizations. They need to think, when do we back off and just let our developers exist? When is our tooling reaching that perfection? Or is there constantly
Is
continuing?
it possible even? Is it possible to reach such point? And I think that when you mentioned, like, when you said when we reach the point let's say we reach the point where developers are at their maximum productivity. You said something interesting. You said based on the metrics that we measure. And I mean, that's our topic, but I want to take it from there and say, okay, so how do we know that those metrics are even good? Like, okay, let's say, yeah, they are productive based on my metrics, but how do I know if my metrics are good? How do I know if it actually reflects their productivity?
Well, platform engineering, if we're dealing with an internal developer platform, there's always been platforms. But the idea of platform engineering is your engineers are your customers. You have a platform as a product approach. So you need a internal marketing, you need user experience design, user experience feedback surveys. So you'll know if you're building the right thing if you are regularly talking to your developers. Typically, that's about quarterly. There may be other ways to get involved. Every company, and I know Snowflake's a polemic term now, but every company is a Snowflake in their uniqueness of their platform engineering program. So sometimes platform engineers embed on the actual teams to understand. Sometimes they borrow the actual team that's maybe requesting and said, how about we borrow you for 3 months to help us build this? So those are both ways to create empathy and understanding directly. Demoing early on. There's no need to have a secret roadmap. That should be public within your organization.
Yeah.
Or even larger if your platform also involves partners, etc. And just constantly getting feedback. Plus, there is quantitative feedback you can get through your systems, and then qualitative feedback.
So, what are some quantitative measures that that you know that are good or can be beneficial?
Yeah, I prefer that can be beneficial. I prefer the flimsy flamsy than are good, because not all.
Yeah, I mean, can be, because I mean, it depends on the company, on the size, on the tools, on many things. Because I think that quantitative metrics are not enough. But we'll get to talk about other ways to measure later. So, yeah,
Absolutely. I just want to say not always good, because how metrics are used is very different. If they're used for what we code change management, also known as downsizings or restructurings, firing people, then those metrics aren't good, and that platform engineering isn't good because you've broken your trust with your customer. So I think that's very important. The most common metric that companies are doing quantitatively is diffs per engineer. So changes or pull requests per engineer in a certain rate of time period. So that's usually the most common. That's the simplest. Then we have the DORA metrics outside of Google, which is, this is a misnomer. Everyone associates with the core four: deployment frequency, lead time for changes, change failure rate, failed delivery recovery time, which used to be mean time to recovery. Maybe reliability is in there too. These are all great. Deployment frequency and lead time for change gives you your speed, and then change failure rate and MTTR or failed delivery recovery time gives you more your quality, your software quality, and maybe stability and security. So you've got your throughput and your stability. So these are important things to measure. They don't necessarily say how productive your
but also I think that if we use those metrics, it can say a lot, not just about the work that the developer is doing, but also the tools that they're using. Like, if it's easy for me to test before I upload something to production, if it's easy for me to make quick changes, it's not just on me, right? Like, okay, if I make a lot of errors, yes, I should look into my own work. But also, let's say not me, someone else is amazing, okay, the best, and then they made an error. Yeah, okay, and the human error, it happens. Okay, so then the time that it takes for me to realize what happened, it's not always just based on my abilities. It's also about the tools that I have to investigate, and then the tools that I have to quickly fix or revert or roll back. So I think these metrics that you described, they can also give you a reflection of the state of your tooling and how easy it is or not easy it is to use them.
So those metrics are a great starting point. They are, this whole DORA formula is like, this is how you become an elite organization or a high performing organization. The problem is there's like more than 100 DORA metrics and questions. It's just we get focused on these 4 or 5, which are easier to measure than most. Same with diffs per engineer is quite simple. You just count how many changes in a given time, and then you divide by how many engineers you have. But with that one, that's not great. The other one that's really common is lines of code. This was made famous by the allegedly called the McKinsey Developer Framework. I say air quotes because it's terrible, but the Developer Productivity Framework, where they spent a lot of time talking about lines of code. Lines of code are not a positive thing always, and not all line of code or all changes are the same. So measuring by them aren't great. I'm writing an article right now on diff authoring time, which is this new, not new, but new to the world because it was on the Meta Engineering podcast, but it's not used by a lot of people yet. But how much effort went into your engineering, maybe another one of those. But there's just so many ways to measure these different things. I wanted to share this. We'll talk about AI more later, but the idea that we're using bugs won't just be the developer's fault anymore. More code is being created than ever. And more bugs are being created than ever. And more bugs that are harder for the developer to find because the AI written code does not have the context of a human being that knew why they wrote it and in the code base. So they're spending significantly more time finding bugs. And 50% of all code that they're releasing that has Gen AI involved has something wrong with it. So we kind of knew that already, but so measuring just these DORA metrics or these other metrics cause this, this type of problem where you don't have the context and it's not enough. I would love to know more about the audience as well. I don't know who's joining us live. Thank you for joining us live. I know I personally sign up for these things and then watch them a week or two later when I feel like it. So I really appreciate those live. But just if we get a little more background on why you're here, what type of company you're at, maybe the size of company or the industry, whatever you want to share, I think that will help us understand your knowledge of platform engineering and metrics.
And generally, we love to hear from the audience. And I think now is a good time to start with a question that we already had in advance. This question came from Evelyn Blue Sky. So I'm going to read her question. And what we will see here is a summary of the question because it's pretty long, but I have to say that I appreciate you, Evelyn, for taking the time to write this to us and share your background with us and the background of the case. So let's get to it. This is what she writes. So I went from growing a mature platform to doing it from scratch. My current startup is very into DevX and empowerment, which I feel falls under the platform umbrella. I'm leaning into that, but I'm worried that they'll go wild and miss the platform approach and end up with more tools. Yeah, that's a big one. Then she says, I have the ability to rate it and gain that under the platform, but I have yet to find the right balance between stewardship and experimentation. What tips do you have for taking that excitement and getting them to succeed in accelerating adopting a platform approach over tools that rando engineers own? So I think that if we sum it up, it says that how do you prioritize the platform roadmap, especially when we have so much tooling today? You also mentioned it, Jennifer, like the growth in numbers of tooling and features, and there's so many things. So how do you keep having that enthusiasm, but then still have, that golden path?
I mean, I don't honestly, I'm suspicious that the role of a platform is for those 20% innovators. I think it's more for the 80% people. Look for, instead of doing all these things they're excited to play with that they've not proven, look for the golden paths. So, what you need to do is ask them what is their biggest, it's fine to start with pizza over in a chat, or get them in having a conversation online, because I'm not trying to advocate people go in person if they don't want to. And the idea is get their biggest frustration, like, or even just have a pop-up when if you can integrate this into your systems, what was your biggest frustration this week? Or when they put that diff forward, or at any point in the process you want to ask. That's a really good place to start, because your job as a platform engineer is not to be innovative. It's to be solving the problems the majority of engineers have, and the things that are breaking their workflow, causing them more cognitive load, wasting their time. I'm just saying, it's probably Kubernetes. If you're a Kubernetes shop, developers do not need to know Kubernetes and the cloud. That is not what they're here for. That does not solve the problems and add the distinguishing value proposition to end clients. Your job as a platform engineer is to take away everything that distracts developers from delivering more value to the clients. And that is a lot of frustration. Often the first thing is finding things. Developers, we see in Stack Overflow survey every year, they spend like an hour a day looking for stuff, 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the percentage point. And that's very frustrating. Who owns what? Who does what? So the first platforms are typically portals or some sort of tool. It can be, this is controversial because the new Platform Engineering O'Reilly book says it needs to be a technical solution, but it could also be documentation. They would say that's not a platform engineering, that's just documentation. But that may be the simple solution. Who owns what in the company? Any sort of discovery information, how to do what, how to get started. And also, if you're going to focus on people, especially as and maybe a little different depending on how small your startup is, because startup is a very bold term that could mean 3 people where you don't need a platform.
50,
yeah, you may have enough contact with those people you actually don't need a platform yet, all the way up to 500 could still be considered a startup. That's probably where we draw that line. But what they have as their frustrations will be different, and you need to decide what you need to automate. But usually it's finding stuff, who does what, who owns what, how do I get permission to what, and then how do I do these things? And I would suggest, if you're going to focus on one group, it's your new starters, it's your onboarders. That's who you want to be most successful. And the elite organizations, or elite or high performing, whatever you want to call them, like Spotify or Atlassian, that really focus on developer joy, not just developer productivity. Netflix, mileage may vary on your opinion on that, but they definitely focus on time to your 10th PR is a big metric for them. So I think trying to improve the onboarding experience of the initial developer, which can involve Gen AI in there and help them ask questions, interrogate documentation. This is great use case for Gen AI is good. But that's a really good first place to measure. And then just overall is platform adoption rate. So if they're not adopting it, you're building the wrong golden path. So the idea of a platform isn't to be creative. It's to provide the easiest path. So the vast majority, usually between 80 and 90% of engineers, choose to do it because it's pain in the butt to go otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you said a bunch of things, but I believe that the first thing, one of the things you said was that you want to focus on the 80% rather than the 20 innovative, super experimental developers. Although, and why is that hard? In my opinion, it's hard because they are more vocal. They are the ones who will comment on every posting that the platform engineer will put in the general Slack channel for everyone. They are the ones who will reach out with questions when you post certain documentation or architecture plan or something like that. But they don't always, and a lot of the times they do have good ideas, and it's worth listening to them. On the other hand, like you said, it's they might come up with things that are way more complex or way more advanced than the developers who just want to find how you do the thing. Who did that? Who owns this? And it's so simple. Like the problems are not simple, but those are like the little things that takes so much time from the developers. And also when you said about the new developers who join, I think that this is a pain point for a lot of companies, especially when a lot of companies have been over hiring, and now they are stuck with people that were not able to do proper onboarding or learn the things in a fast enough. So yeah, I like those 2 points.
And that means stress too. Remember, in this climate, you feel stressed when you're starting a new job anyway. And if you can't be successful quickly, that's very stressful. If you can't be successful quickly at a time of tech layoffs, you're going to make more mistakes. You're going to make more bad code. So
Right.
if there's ways to speed up that onboarding, and people doing their first pull request in the first day is a great goal to have if you have that level of that type of company. Of course, like more regulated companies, that's a bit different, but yeah.
So I have another question, because you mentioned a little bit, about asking the developers, and I want to expand on that. What type of questions are good to ask developers? Also, people in the audience, if you share, I'll be so happy if you could share questions that you felt that were good, that you asked your developers or that you were asked as a developer. Because the problem with internal surveys is that a lot of times there is like a very low response rate, and also a lot of times they're not very easy to take actions on. Like, so both audience and of course you, Jennifer, what are some good questions to ask in an internal survey?
Well, it's a mix of questions that may be open-ended, and it could be conversations too, but also just how productive did you feel? There's subjective questions or qualitative questions that are really important at a general scale, whether it's the scale of a department, division, or company-wide level. Maybe weekly, how productive did you feel this week? If it's an anonymous question, then you can feel safe to answer that. And it could be personal, but at a general scale, it creates trends that are really important. Now, again, I recognize Netflix has a different level of budget than most, but I had a great conversation with Catherine Kohler, and I think they're really important questions they asked that you could ask similar. Do you find our tooling delightful? I love this one. If you were to leave Netflix, would you be sad to leave the tooling behind? Would
Oh,
you
that's a good one.
Yeah. Would you recommend your friends work at Netflix because of the tooling? So as a platformer, I believe they're a developer productivity engineering team. They're focusing on what they do. They're not focusing, are you happy at work? Do you recommend working for Netflix in general? This is not their job. HR should be asking those questions. And these are not replacement questions for HR, but would you recommend your friends work at Netflix because the tooling is good? How effective do you feel in your job because of your tooling? How frequently can you deploy and feel confident about what you're deploying? Yes, that is subjective. You have that actual data. If you're tracking DORA, et cetera, you know how often you're deploying, you know your diffs, you know all these numbers, but how
How do you
how
how do
they
they feel?
feel is
That's
a
so
very
good.
important message. And then
That's
how
so
do you think our tooling is? And if it changes, and then all of these questions, you need to then ask specific questions when you make a change. You bring it, this is a sales process, it's an internal sales process. So you bring up an idea, you ask them questions, you've learned that information, you make a plan, you give it back to them. this is very important because those innovators tend to be the personality or profile of a platform engineer. And so the problem with that is they have to be listening. They need this business acumen and this marketing acumen and this listening to the customers acumen, and not be those innovators all the time, because it's about going through this process. Then you release, you demo to the people, you communicate maybe why you did it. There's a lot more open communication within a company. So you should be more direct and honest and let people know up front. And then you gain feedback about what you did. Because if you're doing surveys and then you're doing nothing with them, people stop responding to the survey.
That's very true. Yes.
So the good companies at platform engineering as have usually about 90+%, not just adoption rate, because then there are different, maybe 80% for adoption, and there are different departments that inherently can't go on the golden path, or only partly because maybe machine learning needs a different language than another department, things like that. But they have a 90% and above response rate to the surveys. So you keep your surveys short because they get survey fatigue, and you change them all the time, but then you would have certain questions that you flow through.
Come back. Yeah. And then you can see a trend over time, and it's actually good. So I think that something that came up here and there, and now we have to say something about it. AI.
Yes.
Is it the solution to everything? No, that's not a serious question.
Okay, so
seriously though, how can we leverage AI? Where is it a good fit, and where is it just in the way?
Okay, so this is another situation where managers are not treating their employees like anything but employees, and they're not asking what their employees want. Because I've been 15 years in this circumstance. And in the 15 years, the number one thing developers complain about is a lack of quality documentation. As it's progressed, it's more searchable documentation, things like that. And in the last maybe 10, because of this tool sprawl, they complain about technical debt and complexity of code. Okay, and yet what are we focusing on? The thing that Gen AI isn't great at yet, which is writing. I just appreciate Nikita's reference to that movie with that book, shame on me, the number one book in the UK. The Galaxy. Words escape me. Yeah, so they focus on that, and they're focusing on code creation. Code creation, if you look at Microsoft's study of what a good day is for a developer, the number one thing a developer wants to be doing in a good day is if they get to create code. But that's about 20 to tops 30% of most developers' days. They're doing so much other stuff. So why are we focusing on automating code, which, by the way, is not good? So this is just crazy. So
such a good question. Why are we focusing on automating code where this is the thing developers actually want to do?
And it's also something that AI is not great at. Like ChatGPT is like 52% of the time. It's persuasive. It is very convincing that it knows the right answer. It does not, but it makes you think
confidence.
But you know what Gen AI is great at? Explaining things. It's amazing at explaining complex concepts. So it could easily be used to, I still think you need a human in the loop to review, but it could be easily used to create test cases, to create documentation, to create nudges for code reviewers, to identify the code reviewer better within the company so the wrong person isn't doing it, or the same person doesn't have like 30 code reviews to make in an hour when other people have none. There's a lot to understand the complexity of the system in systems that are 10 years or older, which most are at this point.
Yeah.
People are starting to retire that created it, or moved on that created something, and there's this little microservice nobody's touching. They don't really know what it does or why. Gen AI can help explain that. That's what Mechanical Orchard does. So there's the boring parts of code. It's not all the code, but I think that's a conflict, yes. But it's creating all the code. It's not just creating the boring parts of the code. And the boring parts of the code should be automated. That's toil. You should not be repeating. You should not do things more than 2 times. If you do it a third, you're supposed to automate it. That's just a basic developer rule. So we have all these things, but then The Atlassian DX State of DevX survey found that like overwhelmingly, I think it was over 80% of leaders believe that AI is the most effective way to improve developer productivity and satisfaction, while 2/3 of developers have yet to see any AI productivity gains. But then, like, that's not always the case of the result, but that is showing you that developer, like, they're planning to spend their whole budget on DevX on AI, but then they're using it for generating code, which is again what not developers want. The harness state of software delivery, which I shared earlier, 67% of developers spend more time debugging AI generated code, while 68% spend more time resolving security vulnerabilities. Again, this is something platform engineering should be looking at.
Right.
But on the other hand, 83% of those that Harness interviewed, which was 50-50 developers and engineers, said that they believe software development has become more efficient with the introduction of AI tools, except 60% aren't measuring it. So I know we're going off on a tangent, and this is a different measurement, but this is a huge factor in the developer lifecycle. But if we're tying now Gen AI with platform engineering, it can help you with the service discovery very easily. It can help you with putting an overlay on everything that's searchable in a conversational way, in a way you can talk and have a communication with the Gen AI. Nathan Harvey pointed out that for new developers, it's not that it's helping them write code, because we know we don't really want the new developers using Gen AI for code writing because they don't have the skill set yet to identify where it's wrong. It's
Where
great.
wrong, or not well written, or later not so easy to read, like not readable. A lot of times that's some of the things that
Yeah,
that's one of the things that you should actually ask when you talk to ChatGPT or chat with ChatGPT. I don't know what the term should be. That's weird. But anyway, like a lot of times I go like, okay, now make it more general, or use, like, make it object oriented. Like you need to say everything. So
is it secure? Is this the correct answer? If you're not asking them it doesn't work. But companies don't have Gen AI policies. More than half don't. So it's not really worth getting into it. It's better to use it for other reasons. And one of the ways is in a platform engineering setting, not only do they get to ask it questions about who owns what, how do I do this, but also it helps them ask. Nathan Harvey at Google pointed out, it helps them ask better questions when they are asking, because when you're starting out, especially, you don't want to you shouldn't feel dumb, but you can feel dumb. Yeah.
It happens.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now I would like, let's see, for a little bit, another question from the audience, and then I guess we're getting closer to the end, but we're not there yet. Let's take another question from the audience. Let's see. Okay. Da-da-da-da. Yeah, how do you measure developer productivity in the age of AI? We kind of talked about it, and then they said junior with AI tools, just like what you mentioned here. With junior with AI tools can win over strong middle who follows organizational policies to the point and is not using AI tools. I mean, I guess it depends, but what do you think about it?
Everyone's using AI tools. It's, what was it? More than half of, in the Harness State Software Delivery survey that came out, I think this week, maybe last week, more than half are using what we call shadow AI, which is shadow AT. They're not using approved tools. And that's the corporation's fault. I mean, it is crazy. We've gone up a bit. It went from 32%, I think last year, had an AI policy. Now like 48% have it. But it is wild to me that, like, you could risk having people put, and this is where platforms maybe should be more traditional platforms, and block you from putting customer information or personally identified information into the chatbots. The problem is, if you as a platform aren't adopting these approved tools, then people are using them on their own. They
On
can
their own, right?
Or proprietary code in there, thus training the bot on your code.
Right.
It my friend Sal Kimmich says, and I think they are totally right, because it constantly shocks me that we haven't had a huge prevailing bug yet, pervaded by ChatGPT or Copilot or something, because it was literally actively, aggressively trained on it. And they're like, no, it's just we haven't found it yet.
Yeah, I think it just didn't happen yet, like you said. Like
It happened. We just haven't found it yet, which is a
Yep.
problem. But if you don't have the basic tools in place to help people create tests, or that everything's tested before it goes live to prod, like these are
They're
important.
gonna find funky ways to test their things anyway, because they don't want to, like, I think that they would prefer to test it before it goes into production rather than test in production. Although I know a few heroes who like to test in production, but
Test and prod, yeah. Talking honeycomb is on. But yeah, when it comes down to it, your job as a platform engineer is to listen to your customers. And then and I promise I was saying this before Wicked became a thing, though I was a big fan of Wicked before. I think it should be called the Yellow Brick Road, not the Golden Pathway. So a platform, if you stay on the Yellow Brick Road, you eventually make it to Oz, whether you should or not, to Emerald City. If you go off, you're going to fall in a field and fall asleep in a field of poppies. You're going to get attacked by flying monkeys, etc. So you're not forcing people to stay on that Yellow Brick Road on those golden pathways, but you're doing everything you can to make a tool that they then want to use, because it makes their lives easier. So that to
easy.
me is what you're looking to measure. Are
Right.
you making their lives easier? Because they are your customers. So that's something we constantly have to remember. And there are so many frameworks to measure it, whether it's space, it's the new, I forgot the name, the Core 4, DX's Core 4, whether it's DevX metrics, which is just focused on flow state. How often can they stay in the flow state? How heavy is their cognitive load? And how tight are the feedback loops? Like how long because the idea that you released a piece of code and then you're waiting 3 hours for the code review back. So do you totally change your perspective to a new piece of code, or do you wait to the response for those? Those are really important. The DORA metrics. There's so many different metrics, but I don't believe any are great besides maybe adoption rate and your onboarding should be your first things. But just understanding your developer's frustration, and that's going to be great for you, and finding the questions that get them feeling safe to voice it. And then while not all companies or brands agree with this, I think for it to be successful, your platform engineering and any developer productivity surveys, etc., have to be anonymous. You can have one-to-ones, you can have embedded, you can have things that everyone knows consensually that they are part of something where you embed, and obviously that's not, and you have the option for non-anonymous. But especially in this time of continued layoffs, you need people to give you honest feedback, and that can only be done at the aggregate anonymized level.
Right.
To understand your trends, you need that individual down there feedback, you need that qualitative feedback, you need that little stuff, but at a quantitative level it should be more general and anonymized. And then do everything you can to get to know your developers better, because they're your customers. They're not
Yes.
easy customers.
I love that. That's so true. I think right before we finish, I have to say that I'm getting the feeling that I should call myself a salesperson, because
No,
myself.
they hate that. No, no, no. Developers hate marketing and they hate salespeople. That's where the
Oh,
whole
so I'm
developer
not. I'm
advocacy
not,
group.
I'm
You
not a
can't call
salesperson.
yourself that.
Maybe, but I won't tell them. But I won't tell the developers. But I feel a little bit like that, but in a good way. The one who's not annoying. I don't know, but it's but I like this I like this idea, and the way that as a platform engineer, I need to think, um, about my customers, about what they actually want and not what I decide for them. Yeah, I think that's a very good takeaway.
Which
And
is not easy, but know that engineers are clever and they will engineer their way around things. If they don't like your tool, they will find a backdoor, and you do not
that's
want backdoors created.
that's so true. That's so true. They will engineer their way around it. That is, yep, that's a pain point right there. And if you
Yeah.
want to avoid it, then there are so many solutions to that.
We're
But first,
not bad. Not a comment. We're not so bad. No, you are problem solvers. And if we try to push you to not be a problem solver, and you're going to engineer your way around it. So I just want to comment
yes,
because someone commented, oh, we're not that bad. I'm not saying you're, but you
right.
are problem solvers, and we should be focusing on you solving problems for your end users. So we
Yes.
solve problems for you.
Okay, so now it's time to wrap up and say again, big thank you for joining us today. The time went by so fast, I can't believe it. I want to ask you more and more things, but let's respect our time and everyone else's time. Even though it's super interesting, you are you're amazing. It's been an honor to have you here. And thank you again. And thank you for the audience joining us. And I saw there was such a live chat. Yeah. Amazing.
Knew it. Continue the conversation and we'll check back in. I don't know how YouTube live chat goes, and I think it disappears and then you need another live chat. But I'll be on LinkedIn and I'll chat with you there. So connect with me on LinkedIn. And then if you're going to be in London, where I am based, KubeCon, the next panel I have coming up so far is how do you measure developer productivity? And it's with Kat Morris from Syntasso, which is provides Cradix, the open source framework for building platforms. Akshaya Aradhya, who works for Oscillator and used to work for GitHub as the head of engineering. Laura Taco, who works at DX, which is a developer insights tooling platform. And Helen Gruhl, who used to work at Backstage, which is the biggest open source product provided by Spotify of a developer platform, internal developer portals, and now works at Multiverse. I just think it's going to be really exciting, and I hope you bring your questions there too. And I see people here in London at State of OpenCon. We've got a lot of exciting things happening. So thank you all very much. And thank you so much, Renee and Guy off screen, for inviting me.
Yes. Okay, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a great day, all.